right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of RSG Insider. I'm Jim Simon, your host today, and I am joined by Mark Sawicki, a director with RSG, a good friend of mine. Mark and I go back a long time. We'll be talking about some of the work that we've done previously when he was my client, as well as some of the stuff that we're doing at RSG. The topic today is getting into real estate from the standpoint of how local government gets involved in real estate. You'll hear us talk in some of the other podcast series parts about specific aspects of finance and feasibility and affordable housing and the like. This is more just from like a purely from a standpoint of trying to talk about, is this the right thing government should be doing? And I guess that's kind of what I want to start off with. But before we do that, Mark, why don't you tell us a little about yourself and your background, and both at RSG and prior?
Sure. Thank you, Jim. Mark Sawicki. I'm a director at RSG. I've been with the firm since during the pandemic. I joined. Prior to that, I was working for 3 different cities for 12 years. And prior to that, I had an early career in real estate finance. And I put that together with a public policy master's and got into redevelopment, which is where I met Jim and RSG when I was working in San Carlos as an economic development manager there. So yes, we've covered a lot of ground over the years, and it's great to be with RSG doing it from the consulting side.
So Mark, let's start with the basic, simple question. There are probably people who think, government's jobs are to, pave the streets, to empty the trash, and to make sure we get water to our communities. What does all that have to do with real estate? Why should governments even be in real estate at all? I guess let's start with kind of that general. What's the business of government being in real estate?
Well, I think it's important to acknowledge that a city's finances and its ability to provide those services is actually deeply tied to real estate. The revenue for a city, tax revenue, comes property tax, sales tax, hotel tax. All of these things are coming from the value of the real estate and the economic activity that's going on in the city. So it is very important for a city to lean into its real estate, make sure its real estate is healthy. There's development. New development creates new property tax. A new commercial development delivers sales tax. New hotel development delivers TOT tax. All of those things are critical for sustaining the city and being able to provide those other services. It's also important for the city, especially in this time in California, to be in the housing business. They're definitely in the affordable housing business, but market rate housing is equally important in every community, and the city needs to lean into that and be proactive.
So it sounds like what you're saying is having real estate as a tool in its toolbox, if you will, allows government to catalyze certain things to happen. You talked about affordable housing. What are some of the other things that we do out of local government or we see in our local governments using real estate for in beyond simply just providing zoning?
Well, cities can be proactive in figuring out where certain things belong. That can happen with planning, but oftentimes you can have the greatest plan and it's not going to happen unless there are some other levers being pulled. Redevelopment in California was a great tool. It was a financing tool, but it was also an opportunity for government and private development to work together in ways that they couldn't do alone. Government doesn't have the expertise to do the development, and the developers are not going to subsidize the things that a city wants. So if a city is involved, they can work some of the levers, the financing levers, as well as some of the planning and approvals to get what they both want and have a mutually beneficial outcome. This can transform whole neighborhoods. We saw that with redevelopment. It can create affordable housing opportunities. It can create new commercial hubs in a city, generating services, and then ultimately producing tax revenue as well.
Right. Yeah, and I kind of like to think about it as real estate. When a government's involved in real estate, it's really just helping fulfill a mission, right, under their general plan. And when you design a general plan and you say this is what we want to see get built in our downtown or in this part of the city, they're relying on the private sector almost entirely to go get that done. And in some cases that can happen, but not in a lot of cases because of feasibility concerns or market concerns or the fact that you might have to acquire several properties to assemble enough property to build a parking garage or an apartment building or what have you. And generally speaking, developers don't have what we call patient capital, right? That time
Right.
to wait and to slowly move to get that done. Because tying up capital for a developer is expensive. It's tying up cash. It takes a long time. It takes money off their books and allows them not to leverage what they're doing. So as a city is doing these things, can you talk a little bit about how it's changed in recent years? Because in the last few years we've seen if you will, a strengthening of the California Surplus Land Act. Most of our work is in California, so we're obviously talking about the activities here in the state. And in the last few years, we've seen a real strengthening of the Surplus Land Act, more oversight by the Department of Housing and Community Development at the state level. How is that affecting cities' use of real estate, either acquiring property or selling property or both? What's your opinion on that?
It's affected some, not all, and I think part of the reason is it goes back to whether a city is continuing to be proactive in real estate or reactive. And many cities have decided they're not in the business of real estate for better or worse, but as I mentioned earlier, they are. The Surplus Lands Act has been around, and you're correct, it's actually the amendments over the last couple of years that have tightened it up. It draws on the assumption that all land should be made available for affordable housing, particularly public land. And it's referred to as the Surplus Land Act because it was meant to apply to land that the city had no other use for. So we talked about earlier about some other uses of land for commercial, for market rate housing, for employment generation, and tax generation. Those are important for a city to do. So I don't believe that every piece of land is highest and best uses for affordable housing. I do think we have an affordable housing crisis in California,
Absolutely.
and we need to lean into that. One of the biggest tools we had for affordable housing was actually redevelopment, which went away. So it's what's led to this crisis. But cities don't, again, need to be reactive, and they don't need to shy away from participating in real estate. The Surplus Land Act provides complications to getting some things done. Again, it assumes everything should be affordable housing. So a city would need to get over that hurdle. There are exemptions. Even the exemptions, however, require a certain amount of process and time. And it requires just being strategic and thinking, what is the best that the city can do with a piece of land? Sometimes it could be selling that land and buying another piece of land that is better suited for what their intention is.
Yeah, I mean, let me stop you there because let's talk a little bit more about that, because I think what's interesting is that one of the things that the the amendments to the Surplus Land Act really did was sort of illustrate at least the state's view that the big problem with affordable housing was there was not enough land available. And while I suspect that might be true in some parts of California, I don't know that's true statewide. And so you're kind of getting to a point as to, well, instead of just selling that land for affordable housing, there's other things you could do.
Right. It's a one-size-fits-all policy across the state, and not every city or jurisdiction is the same. Not every property is the same. Some cities may really need employment generation and
Right.
tax generation and not housing. They may have plenty of land. A city in the Central Valley, a lot of rural and urban areas have plenty of land to produce affordable housing. Land is not the issue. It's money, and it's always been money about creating affordable housing. It can't be provided without a subsidy. Where is the funding coming from?
Right.
So a city may have a very choice piece of property. By that I mean it's got very high value, and that high value would be generated by its highest and best use, which may not be, definitely not be affordable housing, may not even be housing, could be commercial. The city should have the ability to sell that at top dollar and put that money towards affordable housing, where it can then leverage other financing, state and federal subsidies, in addition to the local dollars that were generated from the land, to create even more affordable housing. So those are the strategic things that the surplus land doesn't necessarily directly allow for. And also things that cities just may not be accustomed to thinking about.
Right.
So this is the sort of strategic thinking and proactive thinking that cities should be doing with real estate, and through their economic development team and community development team and hired consultants.
Yeah, that's certainly one way we can help them out. I mean, is it your opinion that as we see this Surplus Land Act take this new prominent role that it seems to have in using real estate, that it was already difficult in some places for cities to look at real estate as something that they need to do strategically, and it's like now the Surplus Land Act has added another layer that you have to sort of go through and think through and figure out. And I mean, I've certainly been in conversations with city managers where it's like, okay, I don't know if I want to go buy this other property because I have to deal with the Surplus Land Act. And even if it's like the first thing you got to do is like explain how, well, maybe that's not going to prohibit you from what you're trying to do. What is it you're trying to do? So, but the fact that there's these new rules coming out, these new restrictions, does take a little bit of the wind out of the sails, it seems like. Is that your impression too?
That is my impression, and it is unfortunate. Again, I believe that cities should still be doing redevelopment even without the tools of redevelopment law. It's investing in your own community. It's reinvesting. It's important to do that. Now, what Surplus Land Act is saying is that any time a city or a county touches a piece of property, purchases a piece of property, when they go to reconvey it, they do have to look at, is affordable housing an option here, and make that available. And if they do go forward with housing that is not affordable, they need to include 15% of those units as being affordable. That's not an insurmountable obstacle. It's more so if they wanted it to be a commercial project, an employment generation or a tax generation project, or something that fits within a greater scheme. Again, not every piece of property needs to be affordable, but if the city or county or jurisdiction had some plan to use some of those dollars that it's creating for affordable housing, I think it can be a win-win for the city, for affordable housing, and for community development. So it's thinking a little bit beyond the box and beyond the one-size-fits-all.
Yeah, there's a lot of thinking, right, that has to go into this, and also in some cases, it's not even a black or white. Is it affordable housing or something else? Sometimes it's, how much of it can be affordable housing, and then what can happen with the rest of it. As we've worked on up in Roanoke Park together, I know, in the building or helping the city, try to form a building a downtown of a 30-acre site that they recently acquired. So let's talk a little bit about like what some of the things we're doing at RSG to help cities navigate these questions. It's increasingly complex. The rules are complex. The Surplus Land Act is complex. The way you think about real estate in local government is its own beast that you were talking about at the beginning here. What are some of the things like you're doing at RSG, would you say, that are helping our clients kind of see the path forward now?
I think it is taking the step back and looking at it strategically. What is it that the city is trying to accomplish, either with an area of the city that needs help, needs growth, needs redevelopment, or for each individual property, what really is the highest and best use? So the kind of things we could do is, market studies. If they don't really already have an idea of what might be the highest and best use, you can test these assumptions. Feasibility is critical up front, figuring out what can be built efficiently, and will it be a positive or a negative? A negative is not necessarily a bad thing if there are things that the community is getting from this, particularly affordable housing. And oftentimes that is the case, otherwise the private sector might already be developing that property. Mm-hmm. So you have to go in with that in mind. What are we gaining, and at what cost, what price?
Right.
Doing some kind of a design. So you might have a piece of property, figuring out what can be built. We will often partner with a architect or design firm to figure that out, and then we could go run the numbers to figure out, well, again, at what cost or is there value? And we had this experience when I worked in San Carlos, doing just that with a surface parking lot and figuring out what could be achieved. But doing this up front so that the city staff has an idea of where they're going, the city council can be brought on board, the community can be brought on board.
Absolutely.
This all happens before going out to the development community and saying, hey, give us your best offer. This allows the city to be, again, proactive, strategic, and explain what they want. And then you can get folks to buy into that or not, and test those waters.
I like the way you said that, because when you think about development sometimes, and which is often a privately led initiative by an applicant who's an outsider of a community, and there's this presumption that applicant's going to go talk to the neighbors, but they're already an outsider from the community. They probably haven't done. It's really difficult to imagine they could do enough homework in the community before they even design their project. So in this sense, what you're really saying is let's get in front of that, get the community involved, get the council involved, both from let's set realistic expectations about the phasing and timing and what can happen here, and then be able to then partner with the developer, where you've kind of done some effectively pre-development work, I guess, right, for them.
Correct.
So yeah, that's a really interesting way, I think, that you kind of teed that up, because it to me it kind of clarifies an important role that government can play. Thinking about your career here, not just at RSG, when we worked in San Carlos together or elsewhere, are there any projects that stand out to you, Mark, that you look back and say, this was a great example of kind of some of the things we're talking about, being strategic with real estate, thinking about economic development, leveraging public land, doing the most we can with it. You have any examples that come to mind you want to talk about?
I had just touched on a project that we worked on together. I worked on with RSG while I was with the city of San Carlos. Was a surface parking lot in the downtown, and we had a vision. We had a vision for replacing that parking with a parking garage, but building housing above it. So we added over 180 homes on top of a parking garage, but we did it in just this fashion. We looked at the opportunity, figured out what could be built, what would fit within a certain envelope. Would it be 3 stories, 4 stories, 5 stories? What could be achieved at these different under these different schemes? How much parking would we get? Would there be replacement? Would there be additional? And then at what cost? And would the city need to be a funder of this, or would the city make money from this? And we looked at several different schemes and determined that there were a couple of them that were actually profitable. We then brought these schemes in just very rough outlines of both what it could look like and what it would cost, or how much could be earned. Brought that to the council, brought that to the community. got approval, and then we went out and did a request for proposals, and we ran that entire process together, RSG and staff, to find a developer, and then negotiated the deal from there.
Right.
But everybody was on board about where it was going. It wasn't a situation where a developer comes in and says, we want to do X, and the community is responding, or even just putting out a request for proposals without giving any indication of what your expectation is.
Right.
And then things get negotiated on the back end,
Right.
After everybody sees what it is.
Yeah.
That's not the best way to do it.
Yeah.
It's better to be upfront, and then things will move a lot smoother.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, because of the fact that we're talking about public property, I think the public itself would have an expectation that there would be more public engagement going into it. So I think it's wise, right, if you're a city that controls this and you want to partner with a developer, don't assume that developer is going to do enough for you, ever enough for you in that situation.
Right.
Do a little bit of that homework yourself. You're going to get a better outcome and a better project. And I think in that one that you're talking about, Wheeler Plaza, I think, the city not only got the project they wanted, they got a profit participation.
They did.
Thanks to you.
Negotiated
you were
a
involved
profit
in
participation.
developing profit participation.
Right,
in
which is something I believe in.
Yeah.
Again, it's the city that is improving their own community, and not only is the tax revenue important, but don't leave it for the developer to generate they generate the upside, but not to participate completely in the upside. The city is putting something in, the city should get something out as a real estate partner.
Right.
That's what I believe a public-private partnership really is.
So that's an example of where cities own property that they had a parking lot and it was a public use, and they maintained that use and added value to it, and then got a lot of benefit out of it.
Right.
What about an example where you had where a city sold property? You mentioned a lot about the benefits of selling property. You have any examples of that you want to talk about?
Yes, again in San Carlos, because we did some great things there. The city had an informal policy that they wouldn't sell commercial property, that they wanted to be a landlord for commercially zoned land, because if it turns over, they want to be able to control that, and the idea being that when you develop something as residential, it will probably always be residential, and the city does not need to be the landlord, and as well as you would like others to be owning that. So this long-standing policy, there was a piece of property right near the freeway, and lo and behold, In-N-Out Burger was very interested in that freeway location. We had to convince the city that it was okay to sell the land. In-N-Out,
Because they wouldn't do a ground lease.
They wouldn't have done a ground lease, and it was a great location. And what we talked to the council about was selling that property, using that money to go buy other property. So just across the street, the city had always wanted to have a hotel. Again, great location for a hotel. They like being near freeway entry and exit. But the city had no stake in that area. So it was a wish. It was a planner's wish that this should be a hotel. It was called the Landmark Hotel designation, but nothing was happening.
Yeah.
We took the money and purchased property in that area.
Yeah. So the In-N-Out Burger site sold that, took those proceeds,
Right.
basically used that to help buy property across the freeway.
Buy
or the
property,
other side of
become
the
a player.
street. Yeah.
So as that area was going to be redeveloped, one of the owners of the adjacent property, which we had an inkling may be interested in selling at some point, the city was now a player, and the city could now be a preferred buyer for a variety of reasons. This way the city could get that hotel that it wanted,
Right.
which then happened. And the city is now generating a lot of TOT revenue. They're
That's the most
generating
successful hotel in the
generating
city.
sales
Yeah.
tax revenue from the In-N-Out Burger. It's one of their top sales tax producers. and has sold this land that it purchased at a phenomenal increase in value. So in all of these ways, the city participated financially, but it also now has an In-N-Out burger for their own residents instead of having to drive somewhere else for those people who want that burger. And there's also a fabulous new hotel in town as well. All of these things have continued to contribute to the city, and the fiscal returns continue indefinitely with that hotel.
Right. So it's like really interesting, right? I mean, a situation where city had property, they kept it, but they built on top of it with a private investor. Another one where they had property and they sold it, and then a third one where they had to go buy the property. In all three situations, different outcomes, but they all benefited the city in some important way. That whole premise of what you said about being strategic.
Yes.
So there you go, Mark. So that is a great way to talk about the real estate and why it's important to be strategic, even with the challenges of the Surplus Land Act that we have today. We've talked a lot about how RSG can help. I really want to thank you for joining us today. You're my good friend and great client, former great client of mine. Glad you're part of Team RSG these days. I want to thank everybody for watching the podcast today. Check us out online if you have more information and want to learn more about RSG. It's rsgsolutions.com, and we will look forward to seeing you at our next episode. Once again, I'm Jim Simon, and have a great day.